The Meta Contract. Day 1. Arrival. The gravel crunched beneath Thomas Eden's rental car tires as he pulled up to the Haven, a Georgian manor house that seemed to emerge from the Yorkshire moors like something half-remembered from a dream. October mist clung to its ivy-covered walls, and the windows reflected nothing but gray sky. His chest tightened, not the familiar squeeze of his damaged heart, but something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or dread. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks after his cardiac episode, printed on cream paper that felt expensive between his fingers. Mr. Eden, you have been selected for the Meta Secret Intensive. 7 days, 7 principles, 7 transformations. Your deposit has been waived due to exceptional circumstances. He'd never applied, never heard of them. But the timing felt like providence, if he believed in such things anymore. A woman in white linen approached his car, ageless face, serene smile, eyes that seemed to look through rather than at him. Thomas, she said, not a question. Welcome to the Haven. I'm Sister Meridian. We've been expecting you. He followed her through oak doors into a reception hall, where 7 other guests stood in a loose circle, each holding an envelope sealed with gold wax. The air smelled of sandalwood and something metallic he couldn't identify. Before we begin, Sister Meridian announced, you must understand that manifestation is real. Your thoughts have power here. Your intentions have consequences. The rules exist not to limit you, but to protect you from yourself. She handed Thomas his envelope. The wax seal bore a symbol he'd never seen but somehow recognized, a spiral within a triangle, bisected by a single vertical line. Read these tonight. Memorize them. Live by them. The Meta Secret works, Thomas, but only for those who surrender completely to the process. His room was on the 3rd floor, spartanly furnished with a single bed, a writing desk, and a mirror that seemed larger than the wall it hung on. He broke the seal as dusk painted the moors purple. The golden rules were written in elegant script. 1. Never speak about the past after sunset. 2. Say thank you out loud every time something unexpected happens, even if it's terrifying. 3. Don't ask other guests what brought them here. 4. Accept all gifts. Refusing attracts balance. 5. Never visualize anything you don't want. 6. If you see yourself standing still in a mirror, leave the room immediately. 7. On the 7th day you must decide, keep everything you've gained, or remember who you were. You cannot have both. At the bottom, in different ink, the entity listening is older than want itself. It remembers every bargain. Feed it carefully. Thomas set the letter down with trembling hands. Outside his window, the moor stretched endlessly into darkness, and for just a moment he could swear he saw lights moving beneath the earth. Day 2, the first lesson. Thomas woke to find a 50-pounds note on his nightstand, not crumpled or worn, but crisp, as if printed that morning. He'd checked his wallet before sleep. 23 pounds 47 pence was all he'd had to his name. Thank you, he whispered, remembering Rule 2. The dining room buzzed with quiet conversation as guests picked at their breakfast. Thomas studied their faces, a middle-aged woman with nervous eyes, a young man who kept checking his phone despite there being no signal, an elderly gentleman who hadn't touched his food. All held the same hollow expression Thomas recognized from his mirror. Sister Meridian entered precisely at 8 o'clock. Today we learn about gratitude, she announced. Not the superficial appreciation of good fortune, but the deep recognition that everything, pain, loss, fear, serves a purpose. Your first exercise, write down every terrible thing that has ever happened to you. Then thank it. Thomas's pen hovered over the blank page. His father's abandonment, the bankruptcy, Margaret's slow withdrawal from their marriage, the heart attack that had left him gasping on his office floor while his secretary called 999. But as he wrote, something strange occurred. The words seemed to glow faintly on the page, and with each thank you he scrawled beside them, the memories themselves began to shift. His father's leaving became a lesson in independence. The bankruptcy became freedom from material obsession. Margaret's coldness became clarity about authentic love. By lunch, his chest pain had completely disappeared. That afternoon, during free time, he explored the manor's grounds. The garden was overgrown but beautiful, wild roses climbing trellises toward a gray sky. He found himself beside a small cemetery, weathered headstones dating back centuries, names worn smooth by time and weather. But one stone was different, fresh. The inscription read, "Here lies Thomas Eden, 1943 to 1979. He died as he lived, wanting." The date was wrong, of course. He'd been born in 1943, but the death year, 1979, was last year, and he was very much alive. "Thank you," he said automatically, then felt foolish for thanking his own headstone. But as he walked back to the manor, he noticed his reflection in the windows seemed brighter somehow, younger. The lines around his eyes had softened, and his thinning hair appeared fuller. At dinner, the elderly gentleman's chair sat empty. When Thomas asked about him, Sister Meridian smiled. Mr. Hartwell completed his journey early. He chose remembrance over reward. These things happen. That night, Thomas found another 50-pound note under his pillow, and a handwritten card. "Your gratitude is noticed. Keep feeding the process." Day 3. Vibrational healing. Thomas woke from dreams of standing in an infinite library where every book contained a different version of his life. In some, he was wealthy beyond measure. In others, he was a broken man living in squalor. In one particularly vivid volume, he was married to a woman who wasn't Margaret, someone with kind eyes and a laugh like silver bells. He'd never met this woman in waking life, yet he could recall the taste of her lips, the sound of her breathing in sleep. "Thank you," he said to the empty room. The morning lesson focused on vibrational frequency, the idea that thoughts and emotions operated at specific energetic wavelengths that attracted similar experiences. Sister Meridian demonstrated with tuning forks, showing how one vibrating fork could cause another to resonate across a room. "Your consciousness is the fork," she explained. "Reality is everything else. Change your frequency, change your world." The exercise was simple. Spend 1 hour in perfect stillness, visualizing your ideal life in exact detail. But remember Rule 5, never visualize anything you don't want. Thomas sat in the manor's conservatory, eyes closed, building his perfect world piece by piece. A restored marriage with Margaret, but not the Margaret who'd grown cold and distant, a Margaret who laughed like the dream woman, who touched him with genuine affection. Financial security, but not the desperate accumulation that had driven him to his heart attack. Comfortable abundance that left time for joy. A healthy heart, a strong body. Years of life stretching ahead like an open road. As he visualized, the air around him seemed to thicken, becoming almost tangible. He could feel reality bending, adjusting, accommodating his desires. When he opened his eyes, his reflection in the conservatory glass showed a man 10 years younger. But in the corner of the room, barely visible in his peripheral vision, something else stood watching. Tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that held the weight of centuries. When he turned to look directly, nothing was there. "Thank you," he whispered. That afternoon, he received a phone call. Margaret's voice, warmer than it had been in years, "Thomas. I don't know what's come over me, but I miss you terribly. I know things have been difficult, but perhaps when you return—" He hung up feeling elated and somehow guilty. This wasn't the Margaret he'd married. This was the Margaret he'd visualized, which raised the question, what had happened to the original? At dinner, 2 more chairs sat empty. The nervous woman and the young man with the phone had apparently completed their journeys as well. Sister Meridian served dessert with her eternal smile. The process accelerates as we approach the end. Some find the weight of transformation challenging. That night, Thomas dreamed he was standing in his London flat, but it wasn't his flat. It was larger, brighter, filled with expensive furniture he'd never owned. Margaret was there, the new Margaret, cooking dinner and humming. She turned to him with that silver bell laugh. "Darling, you've been standing there for hours. Are you feeling well?" He tried to move but couldn't. His reflection in the kitchen window showed himself perfectly still, while this other life continued around him. He woke in a cold sweat, remembering Rule 6. Day 4. Conscious intention. Only 4 guests remained at breakfast. Thomas didn't recognize any of them. Their faces seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly, features rearranging like water. But they all smiled with the same serene expression as Sister Meridian. "Today we learn about intention," she announced. "The universe responds to clarity of purpose. But intention without wisdom is destruction. Intent without sacrifice is fantasy." The lesson took place in the manor's basement, a stone chamber that felt far older than the house above. The walls were carved with symbols similar to the seal on Thomas's envelope, spirals and triangles that seemed to move in his peripheral vision. The ancient practitioners understood, Sister Meridian explained, lighting candles that cast dancing shadows across the carved walls. Every desire carries a price. Every manifestation requires fuel. The question is, what are you willing to feed to the hunger? She handed each guest a small knife, not sharp enough to cause serious harm, but sufficient for the task ahead. A single drop of blood, freely given, mixed with clear intention. Speak your deepest want aloud, and seal it with this offering. Thomas held the knife, his reflection multiplying in its polished surface. Around him the other guests had already begun, small cuts on palms, drops of blood falling onto the stone floor where they seemed to disappear instantly, absorbed by hungry earth. His deepest want. What did he truly desire? "I want to matter," he said, surprised by his own words. "I want my life to have meaning. I want to be remembered." The blood fell from his palm, and the chamber seemed to exhale in satisfaction. The carved symbols pulsed once with faint light, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the candles, something shifted. When they emerged from the basement, the world had changed. The moors were greener, the sky bluer, the manor itself seemed more solid somehow. But Thomas's reflection in the windows had grown strange. Sometimes he appeared as he was now, younger and healthier, but occasionally the glass showed him as he'd been before the haven, tired, gray, broken. That evening he received another call. His bank manager, apologetic and confused. "Mr. Eden, there seems to have been an error in our system. Your account shows a deposit of £50,000 from a source we can't identify. Naturally, we assumed it was fraudulent, but all our checks indicate the funds are legitimate." "Thank you," Thomas said automatically. But as he hung up, he caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror, perfectly still, unblinking, while his body continued moving through the conversation. He backed away quickly, remembering Rule 6, but not before seeing something else in the glass. The shadow figure from the conservatory, standing directly behind his frozen reflection. That night, he found a leather journal on his nightstand, filled with handwriting he didn't recognize but somehow knew was his own. It chronicled a different life. One where he'd never married Margaret, never worked in advertising, never had a heart attack. In this version, he was a successful author, wealthy and celebrated, living alone in a country house that looked remarkably like the haven. The final entry was dated today. The price is almost paid. Soon, the old Thomas will be completely forgotten, and I will be free to live the life I deserve. The entity has been generous, but it grows hungry. I hope the others understand what they're truly surrendering. Day 5. The Shadow Self. Thomas woke to find the journal gone, but the memory of its contents remained sharp as broken glass. 2 guests sat at breakfast, himself and a woman he was certain he'd never seen before, though she smiled at him with familiar warmth. "Good morning, darling," she said, and her voice was Margaret's, but not Margaret's, warmer, kinder, everything he'd wished his wife could be. Sister Meridian served eggs that tasted like childhood summers and coffee that carried the aroma of dreams. Today we explore the shadow self, the aspects of your personality you've rejected, denied, or forgotten. Integration is the key to transformation. The lesson took place in the manor's attic, a space filled with mirrors of every shape and size. Some were cracked, others clouded with age, but all reflected something different. In one, Thomas appeared as a child. In another, as an old man he'd never become. A third showed him as he might have been if he'd made different choices, confident, successful, loved. The shadow contains both your rejected weaknesses and your denied strengths, Sister Meridian explained. To become whole, you must reclaim both. The exercise was simple but terrifying. Stand before each mirror and speak aloud what you saw. Accept every aspect, no matter how uncomfortable. In the first mirror, Thomas saw his father's abandonment reflected in his own emotional withdrawal from Margaret. I accept that I inherited the capacity to leave, he said. In the second, he saw the ambition he'd buried after his first business failure. I accept that I'm capable of greatness. In the third, he saw a killer, not literal, but someone who could destroy others emotionally to protect himself. I accept that I can be cruel. With each acceptance, the mirrors began to show less distinction between versions. The child, the old man, the success, the failure. All began to merge into a single figure that was unmistakably him, but more complete somehow. But in the final mirror, the largest one at the room center, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Nothing. The mirror reflected the room, the other mirrors, even Sister Meridian standing beside him, but where Thomas should have been was empty space. Ah, Sister Meridian said softly, you're further along than I thought. The old self is nearly completely dissolved. What does that mean? He asked, but his voice sounded distant, as if coming from across a great space. It means you're almost ready for the final choice. The entity has been feeding well on your transformation. Soon there will be nothing left of the original Thomas Eden to remember. He reached out to touch the mirror, and his hand passed through the glass like water. On the other side, he could see a room identical to this one, but cleaner, brighter. And in that room stood another Thomas, confident, successful, wearing expensive clothes and a satisfied smile. That Thomas looked up and saw him through the mirror. Their eyes met, and the other man mouthed a single word soon. That evening, the woman who was almost Margaret prepared dinner while humming. The kitchen was warm and comfortable, filled with the scent of herbs and contentment. But when Thomas tried to remember their life together, their first meeting, their wedding day, their shared history, he found only vague impressions, like trying to recall a half-forgotten dream. Darling, she said, turning from the stove, you've been standing there for quite some time. Are you feeling well? He realized he hadn't moved in several minutes, his reflection in the kitchen window showing a perfectly still figure while life continued around him. Thank you, he whispered, backing away from the window. But as he left the kitchen, he heard her voice change, becoming something else entirely. Feed carefully, Thomas. The hunger grows with every gift received. Day 6. The Price of Paradise. Thomas woke in a room he didn't recognize. The walls were papered with newspaper clippings, reviews of books he'd apparently written, photos of award ceremonies he'd supposedly attended, articles about his philanthropic work. In every image, he looked exactly as he did now, younger, healthier, successful. But he couldn't remember writing any of the books, couldn't recall accepting any awards. A breakfast tray sat on the nightstand with a note, final day preparation. The choice awaits. Remember, you cannot have both. The manor felt different now, larger, more modern, as if it were updating itself to match his transformed life. The other guests were gone entirely, their chairs removed from the dining room as if they'd never existed. Only Sister Meridian remained, and even she seemed less substantial, more like a projection than a person. The entity has been generous, she said as he ate breakfast that tasted like every perfect meal he'd ever imagined. Your heart is healed, your fortune secured, your ideal life manifested in every detail. The woman downstairs loves you completely. She is Margaret as you always wished she could be. Your books, yes, you wrote them, in the reality that now exists, are celebrated worldwide. You are remembered, Thomas. You matter. He looked out the dining room window at grounds that now resembled a paradise, manicured lawns, blooming gardens, a life of perfect beauty and comfort. What's the price? He asked. Sister Meridian smiled, and for a moment her face flickered, showing something ancient and hungry underneath. The price has already been paid. The Thomas Eden who entered the haven 6 days ago, the broken, desperate, failing man, has been consumed entirely. He is the fuel that powers this new existence. But I remember being him, Do you? Try to recall something specific, a conversation with the original Margaret, a day at your old job, the exact feeling of your heart attack. Thomas tried, but found only vague impressions, like trying to grasp smoke. The memories were there but insubstantial, already fading. The entity feeds on discarded lives, abandoned possibilities, rejected selves. Every person who comes here surrenders their authentic existence in exchange for their idealized one. The universe remains balanced. Nothing is created, only transformed. And the final choice? Tomorrow, you decide whether to keep this life, this success, this health, this love, or to remember completely who you were. But remember Rule 7, you cannot have both. Choose the new life, and the old Thomas disappears forever, taking all his authentic experiences with him. Choose memory, and everything you've gained here dissolves. That afternoon, he walked through gardens that existed in a state of perpetual spring. The woman who was almost Margaret found him by a fountain that reflected not the sky above but some other heaven entirely. "You seem troubled, darling," she said, taking his hand. Her touch was exactly as he'd always imagined perfect love should feel. "I'm trying to remember our first kiss," he said. She laughed, that silver bell sound from his dreams. "You were so nervous. It was after the poetry reading at the university. You just finished reading that piece about time being a river we can only cross once." But he'd never written poetry, had he? He'd never attended university, had he? "I love you," she said, and he could feel the truth of it radiating from her like warmth from a fire. But love required a self to be loved, and he was no longer certain what self remained to receive it. That evening, exploring the manor's transformed interior, he found a room he'd never seen before, a study lined with his apparently famous books. He pulled one from the shelf, The Weight of Authentic Living by Thomas Eden. He opened it to a random page. "The greatest tragedy is not failing to achieve our dreams, but succeeding by surrendering the self that dreamed them. Paradise without authenticity is merely a beautiful prison, and the prisoner often doesn't realize they're trapped until the key has been thrown away." The words resonated with painful truth, though he couldn't remember writing them. Or could he? The memories felt both foreign and familiar, like recalling something from a half-remembered dream. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that was definitely his, "If you're reading this, it's not too late. The entity keeps what it's given, but choice remains until the 7th day ends. Remember, you are worth more than your desires." That night, he found himself in the basement chamber where they'd made their blood offerings. The carved symbols on the walls were glowing now, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. In the center of the room, something waited, not quite shadow, not quite substance, but undeniably present. It had been feeding on him for 6 days, growing stronger as he grew more perfect. And tomorrow, if he chose to keep this life, it would consume the last remnants of who he had been. But the alternative was returning to a broken heart, a failed marriage, financial ruin, and a life that felt meaningless. The entity whispered without words, "You deserve this paradise. You've suffered enough. Let the pain go. Let the failure go. Let the authentic self that only brought misery go." Thomas stood in the chamber until dawn, listening to the hunger that lived beneath want itself, trying to remember if the man he'd been was worth remembering. Day 7, the final choice. Thomas woke on the 7th day to find 2 envelopes on his nightstand. One was sealed with gold wax, the same spiral triangle-lined symbol from his first night. The other was sealed with red wax that looked disturbingly like dried blood. He opened the golden envelope first. "Thomas Eden, author, philanthropist, beloved husband. Your new life awaits. Sign below to make the transformation permanent. You will keep everything, the health, the wealth, the love, the purpose. The world will remember you as a man who mattered. The only price is a past that brought only pain." Below was a line for his signature and a small knife for the blood seal. The red envelope contained a single sheet of paper. "Thomas Eden, advertising executive, failed businessman, broken man. Your authentic life awaits. Return to who you were, struggling, flawed, human. You will lose everything gained here. but you will remember every moment of who you truly are. Pain included. Choose the genuine over the perfect. Below that, in handwriting he finally recognized as authentically his own. I came here running from failure, but failure is just the shadow that gives success meaning. I came here running from pain, but pain is the price of truly loving. I came here running from my authentic self, but that self, broken as it was, loved Margaret enough to grieve when she withdrew. It cared enough about meaningful work to be devastated by meaninglessness. It was human enough to fear death because life mattered. The breakfast room held a table for two. The woman who was almost Margaret sat across from him, radiant with love that felt real but had no foundation in genuine shared experience. "Have you decided, darling?" she asked. "Did we ever fight?" he asked her. She looked confused. "Why would we fight? What would we fight about? Money. My heart attack. Your mother's disapproval. The way I worked too many hours. The way you withdrew when I needed you most. But those things never happened in our life together." "No," he said quietly. "They didn't." After breakfast, he walked the grounds one final time. Every flower was perfect, every view carefully arranged for maximum beauty. It was paradise, but it was a paradise built on the grave of every difficult truth he'd ever lived. In the cemetery, he found his headstone again. "Here lies Thomas Eden, 1943 to 1979. He died as he lived, wanting." But now there was a second stone beside it. "Here lies Thomas Eden, 1943 to 1980. He died as he lived, dreaming of someone else's life." Standing between the two graves, he finally understood. The entity didn't grant wishes, it traded lives. Every perfect existence it created was built from the discarded authentic experiences of people who couldn't bear their own truth. Sister Meridian appeared beside him, no longer bothering to maintain human appearance. She was tall, impossibly thin, with eyes like deep water. "Choose," she said, "but choose knowing that either path leads to death, the death of who you were or the death of who you could become." What happened to the others, the guests who disappeared? They chose, as you must choose. Some took the perfect life and forgot they'd ever been different. Others chose memory and returned to their struggles. Both groups serve the balance. And you? For the first time, Sister Meridian's expression showed something like sadness. "I chose to remember. I am the keeper of discarded lives, the guardian of abandoned selves. I ensure the entity honors its bargains and maintains the balance between desire and authenticity." Thomas looked at the two headstones, then at his hands holding the two envelopes. "If I choose the perfect life, what happens to the real Margaret? She continues existing as she always has, distant, hurt by your emotional withdrawal, struggling with a marriage to a man whose heart stopped but who survived to become even more closed off. And if I choose to remember, you return to her exactly as you left, broken, desperate, still recovering from the heart attack that brought you here. But you'll remember this week. You'll remember that paradise without authenticity is just another kind of emptiness." Thomas closed his eyes and felt the weight of 6 days of transformation, the healthy heart, the financial security, the woman who loved him completely. All of it could be his. All he had to do was sign away the man who had loved imperfectly, failed genuinely, and suffered authentically. But that man had also been capable of real growth, real change, real love, even if it was messy and complicated. He opened the red envelope and signed his name with his own blood. The world dissolved around him like sugar in rain. Epilogue: The Return. Thomas woke in a hospital bed, machines beeping around him, the taste of metal in his mouth. A nurse noticed his movement and called for the doctor. He'd been unconscious for a week, they said. A severe cardiac episode. His wife had been called. Margaret arrived within the hour, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. Not the perfect Margaret of his dreams, but the real woman he'd married, complex, damaged, struggling with her own fears and disappointments. "Thomas," she said, taking his hand. "I was so scared." Her touch wasn't the idealized perfection he'd experienced at the Haven. It was hesitant, complicated by years of mutual withdrawal and hurt. but it was real. "I need to tell you something," he said. Over the following days, he told her everything, about the retreat invitation that had never existed, about the week that felt like a lifetime, about the choice between perfect love and authentic struggle. She listened with the skeptical concern of someone who loved a man who might be losing his mind. But she listened. When he was released from the hospital, they went home to their small flat with its modest furniture and stack of unpaid bills. No mysterious 50-pound notes appeared. No bank manager called with news of impossible deposits. Thomas remained exactly what he'd always been, a middle-aged man recovering from a heart attack, married to a woman with whom he'd forgotten how to communicate. But he remembered the taste of perfect love, and it made him work harder to find the imperfect love that was actually available. He remembered effortless success, and it made him more grateful for small achievements. He remembered a healthy heart, and it made him treasure each beat of his damaged one. Margaret noticed the change, not a magical transformation, but the harder work of genuine growth. He asked about her day and listened to the answers. He apologized for years of emotional absence. He touched her hand across the dinner table and meant it. Slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild. 6 months later, Thomas received a letter, cream paper, expensive weight, sealed with red wax. Inside, a single line in elegant script. "The entity is always hungry, but so is hope. Choose carefully, always." He showed the letter to Margaret, who examined it with the practical skepticism of a woman who'd learned to trust her husband's recovery, but not his more fantastical claims. "Probably just marketing," she said. "Some wellness retreat trying to capitalize on your vulnerability." "Probably," Thomas agreed. But that night, he wrote in his journal, a practice he'd started since his return. "Today Margaret laughed at something I said. Not the silver bell laugh of dreams, but her real laugh, slightly too loud, a little snorting at the end. I'd forgotten how much I loved that sound. The heart wants what it wants, but the soul needs what is real." Outside their window, London sprawled in all its imperfect glory. Not paradise, but home. And Thomas Eden, scarred, struggling, authentically human, was learning to find meaning in the space between want and reality, where real love grows slow and true in the soil of shared difficulty. The entity remained hungry somewhere in the space between desire and fulfillment. But Thomas had learned to feed his soul on smaller, realer things, and that, he discovered, was enough.